1880. Put that in your head. You are Emily's very, very special guest. You are in her bedroom at the homestead in Amherst, Massachusetts. And please let us silently welcome Emily Dickinson.
I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'll banish us, you know. How boring to be somebody, how public, like a frog, to sing your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. I am so delighted you are nobody. What a privilege it is to be so insignificant. I select you, nobody, as one of my elect. The soul selects its own society, then shuts the door to her divine majority, present no more. Unmoved, she notes the chariots pausing at her low gate. Unmoved, an emperor be kneeling upon her mat. I've known her from an ample nation. Choose one, then close the valves of her attention like stone. Welcome, nobody. Welcome to my finite infinity, my bedroom. This is where I write my poetry. I write at night when everything is silent. Aunt Emily, gingerbread for the children. My brother Austin and my sister-in-law Sue live next door at the Evergreens. They have 3 children, Ned, Mattie, and little Gilbert. We call him Gib. I live here at the homestead with my mother and my sister Lavinia. We call her Vinnie. The homestead was built by my grandfather, Samuel Fowler Dickinson. He founded Amherst Academy and Amherst College and died penniless in Ohio. Penniless in Ohio. My father died 6 years ago, and I wonder, where is he? The art of making perfect bread outweighs every other domestic merit. Housekeeping is prickly. Affection is like bread, unnoticed till we starve, and then we dream of it and sing of it and paint it. Aunt Emily, Aunt Emily. Tomorrow morning, little Gib will run down from the Evergreens to the homestead, stand under my window, Aunt Emily, Aunt Emily. I love my niece and nephews. I love children. Children's hearts are large. I so long to be a child. Bliss is the scepter of the child. I wish we were always children. Even as a child, I knew that I was different. It was given to me by the gods when I was a little girl. They give us presents most, you know, when we are new and small. I kept it in my hand. I never put it down. I did not dare to eat or drink for fear it would be gone. I heard such words as rich when hurrying to school from lips at corners of the street, and wrestled with a smile. Rich, 'twas myself was rich, to take the name of gold, and gold to own in solid bars. The difference made me bold. I am different. I only wear white. I do not cross my father's grounds to any house or town, and I dwell in possibilities. I remember when my little nephew Ned was a little boy, he stood gazing up at the evening star and said wistfully, "Oh, Aunt Emily, I wish we could go up there." "All right, Ned," I said, "go get the horse and buggy and we'll go up there tonight." His grave rebuke, "Aunt Emily, you can't go up there in a horse and buggy." Well, I dwell in possibilities. I put my gingerbread in the basket. I hang the basket out the window. "Aunt Emily, little Gib will take the gingerbread out, go off to the woods and have a picnic." Suffer, little children, the world is but the world. Night is my favorite day. I love silence. Flowers are so enticing. They are not quite earthly. They are like the saints. I have long been a lunatic on spring and spring flowers. They come in happy safety and rest in their subterranean homes. Spring is a happiness so beautiful, so unique, so unexpected. I don't know what to do with my heart. Blossoms and cakes and memory. Choose ye which ye will serve. I choose memory. Blossoms will fade away, cakes rain but a day, but memory, like melody, is pink eternally. Two things I have lost with my childhood: the rapture of losing my shoe in the mud and walking home barefoot, wading for cardinal flowers, and the mother's rebuke. I suppose a mother is one to whom you hurry when you are troubled. If that is true, then I never had a mother. My mother was ruled by my father. "What can I get you, dear? Do you need anything? Do you want anything?" She rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life to take the honorable work of woman and of wife. If aught she missed in her new day of amplitude or awe, a first perspective, or the gold in using wear away, it lay unmentioned as the sea developed pearl and weed, and only to himself be known the fathoms they abide. My mother did not care for thought, and although my father bought me many books, he begged me not to read them for fear they joggled the mind. My father read on Sundays. He read lonely and rigorous books. My father was the oddest sort of creature. He would say in fugitive moments that his life had passed him by. It had passed in a wilderness or on an island. And so it was, for in the morning I would hear his voice, and it came from afar and had a sea tone, and there was a hum of hoarseness about it and a suggestion of remoteness as far as the Isle of Juan Fernandez. You know, my father never played. Blessed are those that play, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. It's easy to work when the soul is at play. My father's real life and mine sometimes came into collision, yet escaped unhurt. Father at supper one night remarked whether a certain nicked plate must always be placed before him. I carried the plate to the garden and I pulverized it on a stone just to remind myself not to give it to father again. I never could tell time by the clock till I was 15. Father thought he had taught me, but I did not understand, and I was afraid to say I did not and afraid to tell anyone lest he should know. The last April, my father was alive. There were several snowstorms, and the birds were so cold and frightened they sat by the kitchen door. My father went out to the barn in his slippers and gathered a breakfast of grain for each, and then hid himself and scattered it, lest it embarrass them. Unbeknownst to the name or fate of their benefactor, their descendants were singing this afternoon. They were even frolicking on father's grave when Vinny went there yesterday. I hope you love birds too. It is economical. It saves going to heaven. I dream about father every night, always a different dream, and forget what I am doing daytimes, wondering, where is he without any body? My father is a pause of space. Dying is a wild night and a new road. Where is he? The last afternoon my father was alive, though with no premonition, I preferred to be with him. My Vinny being asleep, I invented an absence for mother. He seemed peculiarly pleased, as I often stayed by myself, and remarked, as the afternoon withdrew, that he would like it not to end. His pleasure almost embarrassed me, and knowing my brother Austin was coming, I suggested they go for a walk. That night, my father died, and I saw him no more. Dying is a wild night and a new road. Where is he? Each that we lose takes part of us. A crescent still abides, which like the moon some torpid night is summoned by the tides. The things that cannot come back are several. Childhood, some forms of hope, and the dead. Death's the common right of all living creatures, the common right of toads and men, the privilege of all. Death is the only one you cannot find out all about in his native town. Nobody knows his father, never was a boy, hadn't any playmates or early history. Industrious, laconic, punctual, sedate, bolder than a brigand, swifter than a fleet. Pain enlightens us to the inexorable law, the form by which we live and die. It opens up before us the vista of things as they are. It shows us the meager economy of our lives, which includes, however, certain ceremonious occasions, though these take their example from the final ascension to immortality. Two terrible things happened to me in my life. One was almost losing my eyesight. When I was 30, I could not read for 7 months. It was Siberia. And the other was the dying of my father. His heart was pure and terrible. And I think no other like it exists. Where is he? The mighty dying of my father left no external change. I still live here at the homestead with my mother and my sister Vinnie, though now mother's helpless, a holier demand. She was paralyzed by a stroke a year from the night my father died. Mother is timid and feeble, but we keep her with us. She lies changeless in her changeless bed, hoping a little and fearing much. She does not yet stand alone and fears she will never walk, but I tell her that we will all fly so soon, not to let it grieve her, for what is earth but a nest from whose rim we are all falling? We were never intimate, mother and child, while she was our mother, but minds in the same ground meet by tunneling. And when she became our child, the affection came. Where is my recipe for black cake? Perfect cake is winey and fruity and spicy, and people must have puddings. My poetry. I've written almost 1,800 poems. Don't worry, nobody. Vinnie has promised to burn everything when I die. Vinnie is soldier and angel. Hope is the thing with feather that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Little sentences I began and never finished, the little wells I dug and verses filled. To make a prairie, it takes a clover and one bee, one clover and a bee, and reverie. The reverie alone will do if bees are few. I am from the fields, you know, and while quite at home with the dandelion, make but sorry figure in a drawing room. The supper of the heart is when the guest is gone. People must have puddings. and cut 8 ripe tart apples and put them in a pudding dish. Take a quart of milk, 6 eggs, and sufficient flour to make a thin batter. Pour the batter into the dish until it is nearly full. Bake it until the apples are clear or you think it is done. Serve it with wine sauce or cold sauce made with butter, sugar, and nutmeg. Beat well together. People must have puddings. If I can keep one heart from breaking, I shall not love in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. Carlo, my dog Carlo, my Newfoundland dog, my shaggy ally for 15 years. My father bought me my dog Carlo. Carlo and I would go on long, long walks. I loved my dog Carlo. Carlo died. I started early, took my dog, and visited the sea. The mermaids in the basement came out to look at me, and frigates on the upper shore extended hempen hand, presuming me to be a mouse aground upon the sand. But no man moved me till the tide went past my simple shoe, and past my apron and my belt, and past my bodice too, and made as though to eat me up, as wholly as a dew upon a dandelion sleeve. And then I started too, and he followed close behind. I felt his silver heel upon my ankle. Then my shoes would overflow with pearls, until he met the solid town no man he seemed to know, and bowing with a mighty look at me, the sea withdrew. I explore but little since my dog Carlo died. I do not go away, but the grounds are ample, almost travel for me, and the few that I knew came since my father died. A little boy from Amherst ran away a few days ago, and when asked where he was going, replied, Vermont or Asia. Some of us travel farther in our minds, in what we write. Don't worry, nobody. Vinny has promised to burn everything when I die. Vinny has been all for so long, I feel the oddest fright going without her for even an hour, lest a sudden storm should arise or I go unsheltered. I have 2 beloved sisters. One sister have I in our house, and one a hedge away. There's only one recorded, but both belong to me. One came the road that I came, and wore my last year's gown. The other, as a bird her nest builded our hearts among, that would be my sister-in-law, Sue, my brother Austin's wife. With the exception of Shakespeare, Sue has taught me more of knowledge than anyone living. I appreciate Sue's praise for my poetry because I know it knows. Sue is the only one in my family that knows that I am a poet, that I am a great poet. If I could make Sue and Austin proud of me someday, a long way off, it would give me taller feet. Austin and I were talking about the extension of consciousness after death. And Vinnie told me afterwards that Mother told her she thought it very improper. Mother forgets we are past correction in righteousness. I don't know what she would say if she knew that Austin told me confidentially there was no such person as Elijah. All of my family is religious except me. Would they have me lie? Don't you know, no is the wildest word we consign to language? I'm nobody. Who are you? I took my power in my hand and went against the world. 'Twas not so much as David had, but I was twice as bold. The only verse in the Bible that ever appealed to me was, "Consider the lilies, how they grow. They toil not, they spin not. And yet I say unto you that Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these." Were all its advice so enchanting, we should probably heed it. The verse in the Bible that frightened me the most was, "From him that hath not shall be taken even that which he hath." The Bible deals with the center. I deal with circumference. Birds, bees, cakes, possibilities. I have read a poem in the book of Revelations. Fabulous to me are the men of the book of Revelations who shall not hunger anymore nor thirst anymore. Santa Claus illustrates Revelations. My father frowned upon Santa Claus and all other such prowling gentlemen. When Jesus shows us his Father, we distrust him. When he shows us his home, we turn away. But when he confides in us that he is acquainted with grief, we listen, for that also is an acquaintance of our own. Say what you will about Jesus. He knew the human soul better than any other being who ever trod this earth. And he testifies, and his testimony is more clear, more definite, more positive on this than on any other subject, that there is life beyond the grave. Are you certain there is another life? When overwhelmed to know, I fear that few are sure. How invaluable to be ignorant, for by that means one has all in reserve, and it is such an economical ecstasy. I cannot tell how eternity seems. It sweeps about me like the sea. Beyond that, all is silent. Birds, bees, cakes, possibility. How vast is the chastisement of beauty given to us by our Maker. Beauty crowds me till I die. All we secure of beauty are its evanescences. I died for beauty and was scarce adjusted in the tomb when one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room. He questioned softly why I failed. For beauty, I replied, and I for truth, the two are one, we brethren are, he said. And so as kinsmen met a night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. Dainty, dainty death, democratic death, grasping the proudest zinnia in my purple garden, then deep to his bosom calling the serf's child. Say, is he everywhere? Where shall I hide my things? If we had the least intimation of the definition of life, the calmest of us would be lunatics. Blossoms and books are the solaces of sorrow. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toil. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. Poets are the dearest friends of all time, the strongest friends of the soul. Dickens, Keats, Ruskin, Sir Thomas Browne, the Book of Revelations, Charlotte and Emily Bronte, the poetry of Robert Browning and Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the novels of George Eliot. Shakespeare was the first. Antony and Cleopatra, when Enobarbus laments the amorous lapses of his master, the ring of it is this: heart that scuffles of great fights hath burst the bubble in his breast. Let some kind voice read to you the oration over Mark Antony. I never heard a broken heart to break itself so sweet. Why grasp any hand but this? Give me ever to drink of this wine. He has his future who has found Shakespeare. The immortalities, the dearest friends of all time, my kinsmen of the shelf. When I was 18 years old, Benjamin Newton, my father's law student, became for me a gently grave preceptor, teaching me what books to read, what authors to admire, what was most grand and beautiful in nature, and that sublimer lesson, a faith in things unseen and a life deeper and much more rich. He taught me immortality. I was then but a girl, but I was old enough to admire the strength and grace of an intellect far surpassing my own. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a name my father's law student taught me, touched the secret spring. The poet, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The poet is representative. He stands among partial men as the complete man and apprises us not of his wealth, but of the common wealth. He is isolated among his contemporaries by truth and by his art, but with this consolation in his pursuits, that they will draw all men sooner or later. For all men live by truth and stand in need of expression in love, in art, in avarice, in politics, in labor, in games. We study to utter our painful secret. The man is only half himself. The other half is his expressions. When I state myself as a representative of the verse, I do not mean me, but a supposed person. It's all I have to bring today. This and myself besides. This and myself and all the fields and all the meadows wide. Be sure you count, should I forget, someone the sum could tell. This and myself and all the bees that in the clover dwell. How wonderful are the wiles of words. I hesitate which word to take, since I can take but few, and each must be the chiefest. But recall that earth's most graphic transaction is placed within a syllable, nay, even a gaze. To pile like thunder to its close and crumble grand away, while everything created hid, this would be poetry. To be worthy of what we love is the supreme aim. It is a great thing to be great. The poets light but lamps, themselves go out. The wicks they stimulate, if vital light, inhere as do the suns, each age a lens, disseminating their circumference. Birds, bees, puddings, cakes, possibilities. I correspond with friends. Friends are my estate. How worthy is a friend, a gift of neither heaven nor earth, yet coveted of both. Thomas Higginson, the editor of the Atlantic Monthly, Mrs. J.G. Holland, Lord Otis, my paramour, Lord Otis, my paramour. I confess that I love him. I rejoice that I love him. I thank the maker of heaven and earth that gave him me to love. The exultation floods me. O nation of the soul, thou hast thy freedom now. Mrs. Helen Hunt Jackson, is one of my friends who I correspond with. She is deemed America's greatest woman poet. Thomas Higginson reintroduced us actually 5 years ago. Helen and I were girlfriends growing up in Amherst. And last week I received this letter from Helen. Dear Emily, you are a great poet, and it is wrong to the day you live in that you will not sing your verse aloud. When you are what men call dead, you will be sorry you were so stingy. You say you find great pleasure in reading my verses. Let somebody somewhere whom you do not know have the same pleasure in reading yours. I will copy them, sending them in my own handwriting, and promise not to tell anyone whose verse they are to the publishers. Could you bear this much publicity? Only you and I would recognize the poems. Now, will you let me send the poem to Robert Brothers, the success poem? I have memorized it by heart. Could you bear this much? Could you refuse the one thing that I ask you? The one thing I will perhaps ever ask you? Could you bear this much publicity? Your friend, Helen Hunt Jackson. Success. Success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend a nectar requires the sorest need. Not one of all the purple host who took the flag today can tell the definition so plain of victory as he defeated, dying, on whose forbidden ear the distant strain of triumph break, agonizing clear. Thankfully, Vinnie has promised to burn everything when I die. Vinnie is soldier and angel. God keep you from dementia. Where is my recipe for black cake? A perfect cake is winey and fruity and spicy, and people must have puddings. Let's see, black cake, currants, prunes, dried plums, cinnamon, cardamom, mace, sugar, black cake. 2 pounds flour, 2 pounds sugar, 2 pounds butter, 19 eggs, 3 pounds raisins, 1½ cups currants, 1½ cup citron, 1/2 pint brandy, 1/2 pint molasses, 2 nutmegs, 5 teaspoons cloves, mace, cinnamon, 2 teaspoons soda. The art of making perfect bread outweighs every other domestic merit. Housekeeping is prickly. Birds, bees, cakes, puddings, possibilities. I dwell in possibility. A fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof, the gambrels of the sky. Of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather, paradise. To have lived is a bliss so powerful we must die to adjust to it. So I conclude that space and time are but things of the body and have little or nothing to do with ourselves. My country is truth, and the truth must dazzle gradually, or every man be blind. Perhaps you smile at me. I could not stop for that. My business is circumference. I wish nobody. I wish we were children now. 2 pounds flour, 2 pounds sugar, 2 pounds butter, 19 eggs. I am ready for questions if anyone has any to Emily in the tradition of WomanLore, performing women in history. And then after me, the other person will come on. So first, questions to Emily.
Anyone? I have one which is, well, actually, I don't know if this is for Emily. This might be for Betsey.
I will change into the other person.
How old was Emily when she died?
She was born in 1830 and she died in 1886. So she was 56 years old.
56.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. And she stayed in that house her whole life, didn't she?
She did. And that was not unusual for the 19th century for women to live with their families. They were domestic. They had no real life outside their homes. There was not really work for them to do. Nursing was just coming into its own, and teachers were mostly men. The amazing thing is what Emily did, this genius, is that she cast herself. She created a vocation for herself, and that vocation was that of poetry. And she wrote 1,800 poems. I have read that about 25 of those are truly great poems. I mean, and many of them were quite good poems. I have a brilliant writing from Adrienne Rich that was written. Adrienne wrote this, I think, for the New Yorker about angry women writers. Emily was one of those, and it's quite brilliant. I want to say that Emily only wore white because she deemed herself a priestess of sorts. She was a nature worshiper, a pagan, she defined herself as, and she felt like she was wrestling God with her pen. And so that is why she only wore white. Also, she was reclusive because she really didn't want to talk to the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker. She wanted to, and Adrienne exquisitely talks about this in her essay, part of her essay about of which she includes Emily Dickinson in. But anybody else has any questions? Her poems, of course, were published, even though she told Lavinia to burn them all. She knew also Lavinia was going to show this poetry to her sister-in-law, Sue, and Sue would say, absolutely do not burn that poetry. Her poems, 13 poems were published in 1890, and they were actually changed. If you read Shakespeare, the original folio, Shakespeare actually tells the actor how to read his verse. He does commas, he does, dashes and capitalizations. So it tells the actor how to read the verse. Emily did the same thing with her poetry. She was very familiar with Shakespeare, and she did strange commas and pauses and caesuras. And that was a little bit cleaned up. But what happened when her poetry was published in 1890, the critics did not like her, but the public really loved her. And slowly but surely, her standing in the world of letters has grown until she is deemed one of the greatest American poets, perhaps the greatest American woman poet. So that is pretty exciting. And she knew she was a great poet. She knew she was a genius when she was a child. I understand that Abraham Lincoln knew he was a genius when he was a child. So I guess I have not had that experience, but there you go. I want to read to you Adrienne Rich's part of her essay. Here it goes. I have a notion that genius knows itself, that Dickinson chose her seclusion, knowing she was exceptional and knowing what she needed. It was, moreover, no hermetic retreat, but a seclusion which included a wide range of people, of reading and correspondence. She carefully selected her society and controlled the disposal of her time. Given her vocation, she was neither eccentric nor quaint. She was determined to survive and to use her power to practice necessary economies. Suppose Jonathan Edwards had been born a woman. Jonathan Edwards was a Boston minister who was a bit eccentric. Suppose William James, for that matter, had been born a woman. Even from men, New England took its psychic toll. Many of its geniuses seemed peculiar in one way or another, particularly along the lines of social intercourse. Emily Dickinson, viewed by her bemused contemporary Thomas Higginson as partially cracked, by the 20th century as fey or pathological, has increasingly struck me as a practical woman, exercising her gift as she had to, making choices. I have come to imagine her as somehow too strong for her environment, a figure of powerful will, not at all frail or breathless. The terms she had been handed by society, Calvinist Protestantism, Romanticism, the 19th century corseting of women's bodies, choices, and sexuality, could spell insanity to a woman genius. What this one had to do was retranslate her own unorthodox, subversive, sometimes volcanic propensities into a dialogue called metaphor, her native language.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Brilliant, right?
Yeah, that's
Really,
fascinating.
yeah, very, very brilliant.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
I don't see any questions coming in though, so I guess everyone's okay. I just want to know, you said, I think, what did you say, 13 poems she published before she
No,
found
she, you know what really frightened her was Thomas Higginson, who was the editor of the
right?
Atlantic Monthly, was the best of the best. She adored him. And they had a correspondence going, and he was all on all the right sides of the, very, forward-thinking issues of the 19th century. She sent him 4 of her great poems. He did not understand them. That frightened her. And she thought, I better not put my poems out there because she's human. She'll be affected by the criticism. So she protected herself. And so basically, she did not want any of her poems published. Also, by that time, in the 19th century, she was raised very bibliocentrically, very, very conservatively. And America was rolling into a very materialistic time, industrialization. The spirituality was dissipating. People were worshiping money. That's what was happening. And she was sort of wondering, would people really even understand her poetry and where she was coming from? So she wanted to protect herself. I think it was a really good choice on her part, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
So those 13 poems were published after she died. She died in 1886 and 1890, 4 years later. Thomas Higginson, by the way, and actually Austen's mistress, Mabel Todd Loomis, they published the poems.
And then so that was like a chapbook, I guess, of poetry.
I don't know. I mean, poetry was in the 19th century really helping to define who we were as Americans. America was a very young country. It had just been developed. And so you get Walt Whitman. This is what we are as Americans. The Transcendentalists, Ralph Waldo Emerson, they were all starting to define who are we as Americans? Who are we as a citizenry, as a nation? And New England had a very, very high literacy rate. 75% of all New Englanders read and were very literate. So, this was all changing as immigrants were coming in and as industrialization took hold and grabbed the country. And so, anyway.
So that first publication, that small book, and then did Lavinia send those out then?
Well, actually, there became a very, I think it went into a legal battle between Sue Dickinson, right, and Mabel Todd Loomis, Austen's mistress, who felt like she owned them. And there was a lot of acrimony that happened in the family. But slowly but inexorably, her poems did get released to the public, and they were more and more appreciated. She really came out in the 1950s. Her poetry was really kind of rediscovered, and that's when people really started enjoying it and being filled by it and realizing this poetry is still speaking. And on some level, she was really kind of sort of the first modernist. I mean, in the 19th century, you had this stentorian poetry, all our architects of fate working in these walls of time. And here came out Emily, extremely female, birds, bees, possibilities. I mean, very domestic, very female, puddings, cakes. She was honoring a black cake recipe and a pudding recipe as much as poetry, as that is as worthy, so she was a feminist of the first order and a modernist, really one of the first modernists, and very much a individualist, as in Walt Whitman was about the community. He was the great lover, and Emily was very reclusive and very quiet and doing something different, and yet going very deep and speaking to death, which she was wrestling with all the time, of course, and the nature of human reality.
Fascinating.
She didn't accept the religious aspect of the Trinitarian religion, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. She said, well, if there's a father, where's the mother? If there's a son, where's the daughter?
The daughter, yeah.
So it's such a patriarchal, and she's like, well, what about me? I'm not buying it. Not going there. Not going there. Yeah. Not going there. Thank you so much for the gift of performing for you. I really appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much as well.